The hum of the server room was Chris's lullaby. For years, it had been his sanctuary, a place where lines of code transformed into elegant solutions, where digital architectures rose and fell at his command. He was a web developer, not a showman, not a schmoozer, just a craftsman who believed in the quiet power of a perfectly executed function. And right now, Chris was the architect of something extraordinary. This wasn't just any project, it was the project. The kind that got champagne toasts, bonus checks, and glowing profiles in industry magazines. It was a guaranteed success, a digital masterpiece poised to redefine their company's online presence. He'd poured his soul into it, meticulously documenting every iteration, every decision, every triumph, from the initial wireframe sketched on a napkin to the final, polished backend. He'd built this thing from the ground up, brick by digital brick. His boss, Frank, on the other hand, was more of a conceptualist. Frank's management style was less about guiding and more about delegating his own inertia. His days were a symphony of buzzwords, empty platitudes, and strategically placed sighs that conveyed an overwhelming sense of importance. He was a master of the vacant stare, the well-timed nod that suggested deep thought but usually signified an empty mind. Chris had learned early on that Frank's praise was as substantial as a cloud of steam from the office coffee machine, and his criticism was equally fleeting and nonsensical. Frank was the kind of manager who could talk for an hour about synergizing paradigms and leave you wondering if he just invented a new type of stapler. Then there was HR, a department that, in Chris's experience, operated like a DMV for human emotions, all forms, all rules, and a pervasive sense of passive-aggressive power. They were the gatekeepers of corporate niceties, the arbiters of acceptable office behavior, and, as Chris was about to discover, capable of crafting justifications that would make a seasoned con artist blush. The email landed in Chris's inbox on a Tuesday afternoon, casual and innocuous, like a pleasant ripple on the surface of a placid lake. Subject: Project Zenith, succession planning. Chris opened it, expecting a routine update, maybe a mention of his progress. Instead, he found himself staring at words that felt like a cold splash of water from a leaky faucet. Frank and HR were initiating a succession plan for Project Zenith. They called it a strategic move to ensure continuity and a developmental opportunity for a broader team. Chris, they explained, was being transitioned out of the lead role. The reason? A carefully worded phrase that landed like a lead balloon. Challenges in meeting projected deadlines and demonstrating readiness for leadership at this critical juncture. Challenges? Chris replayed the last 6 months in his head. He'd been working 16-hour days, weekends included, pushing the project forward with a relentless drive that Frank, in his infinite wisdom, seemed incapable of even acknowledging. Every milestone had been hit, every deliverable submitted ahead of schedule. He had the emails, the commit logs, the Slack messages to prove it. He was the opposite of unready. He was the indispensable engine powering this entire endeavor. Frank called him into his glass-walled office shortly after. The space itself felt like an extension of Frank's personality. All polished surfaces and no substance. Frank, perched behind his oversized desk, wore a tie that screamed expensive mistake and a smile that looked permanently affixed, like a mask of forced sincerity. "Chris, my man, great work on Zenith," Frank began, his voice a syrupy blend of false bonhomie and practiced sincerity. "Truly outstanding. You've laid a fantastic foundation. We're incredibly impressed with your dedication." He paused, leaning back, the leather of his chair groaning in protest. "Which is why we've decided to bring in a more seasoned hand to see it through to completion. You understand, right? This is a big one. We need someone with a proven track record of, executive oversight." Chris felt a prickle of unease, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor beneath the surface of his professional calm. "Frank," Chris began, his voice level, "I've been working on this project for nearly a year. I've hit every deadline, delivered every feature. I'm not sure I understand what challenges you are referring to." Frank waved a dismissive hand, a gesture that managed to be both condescending and utterly devoid of actual movement. "Oh, it's not about you personally, Chris. It's about the project's life cycle. Look, HR and I have been talking. We see your strengths, absolutely. You're a brilliant coder, a true technician. But this project needs vision. It needs someone who can navigate the complex stakeholder landscape, someone who can synergize with the executive team on a strategic level." He winked, a conspiratorial glint in his eye that made Chris feel like he was being sold a used car with a suspiciously clean engine. "You're still young, Chris. This is just a stepping stone. Think of it as an opportunity to step back, reflect, and maybe take on some of our smaller, more manageable initiatives. We'll find something that's a better fit for your current skill set. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, like the stale scent of stale coffee and desperation. Manageable initiatives. Current skill set. He wasn't being promoted or even sidelined. He was being phased out. The brilliance of his work, the sheer dedication, the hundreds of hours he'd poured into Zenith, all of it reduced to a footnote in Frank's narrative of strategic vision. Frank, I don't think you understand the complexity of the systems I've built, Chris said, his voice losing some of its initial composure. Transferring the lead on this now without a proper handover, without my direct involvement, is going to cause significant issues. The architecture is custom. The integrations are deeply intertwined. It's not a plug-and-play scenario. Frank's smile widened, a predatory glint now visible beneath the veneer. That's exactly why we're making this change, Chris. To ensure there is a smooth transition. We've got someone lined up who can handle that. Someone with more experience in high-stakes project management. He stood up, signaling the end of the conversation with the decisive finality of a gavel strike. HR will be in touch with the details of your separation package. We'll need your company laptop, your badge, and all company property by end of day tomorrow. Thanks for your service, Chris. Really. Chris walked out of Frank's office, the polished glass reflecting a distorted image of his own disbelief. He felt a cold, hollow ache in his chest, a sensation akin to being professionally mugged. The air outside Frank's office, usually alive with the subtle buzz of productivity, now felt alien and hostile. He saw a couple of HR representatives conferring in hushed tones, their faces a mask of practiced neutrality that screamed anything but. They probably already had his termination paperwork drafted, waiting like vultures for the official signal. He went back to his desk, the glowing monitor a stark reminder of the hours he spent there, building something that was now being snatched away. His colleagues offered sympathetic glances, murmurs of surprise, but no one dared to ask too many questions. The corporate world had its own unwritten rules, and one of them was, don't get too close to the victim of a corporate purge. As he packed his personal belongings into a cardboard box, a worn coffee mug, a few well-loved technical books, a framed photo of his dog, a strange calm began to settle over him. It wasn't resignation. It was something colder, something sharper. It was the quiet hum of a mind processing a new equation. Frank and HR had made their move, confident in their ability to dismiss him, to erase his contribution. They saw a disgruntled employee, a cog being removed. They didn't see the architect who had laid the foundation, who understood the intricate wiring, the hidden pathways, the very DNA of the system. They thought they were firing him for failing to meet deadlines. They were wrong. He hadn't failed. They had simply failed to see what he was truly building. And in that oversight, they had made their first, and likely their last, fatal mistake. He remembered the late nights, the meticulous documentation. He had files upon files, logs upon logs, every decision, every line of code, every email, a testament to his ownership. He had a digital breadcrumb trail that led directly to his brilliance. But he had also done something else, something far more elegant. A contingency, a safeguard, a digital trap, woven into the very fabric of the Project Zenith code. A secret handshake only he knew. A series of subtle, almost imperceptible glitches designed to trigger if the project was ever transferred without his express knowledge and consent. Minor annoyances, perhaps, to the uninitiated. But to those who understood the delicate balance of the system, they would be like 1,000 tiny paper cuts, bleeding the project dry of its functionality, its credibility, and its profitability. A digital booby trap set to spring the moment Frank and his crew thought they had won. Chris carried his box of belongings out of the office, the fluorescent lights of the hallway buzzing overhead like an anxious swarm of gnats. He didn't look back. He didn't feel anger, not exactly. He felt a strange sense of clarity. They had taken his project, his job, his perceived future, but they hadn't taken his knowledge. They hadn't taken his documentation. And they certainly hadn't accounted for the digital booby trap he left behind. As he walked out into the sunlight, the weight of the cardboard box felt lighter than the burden of their arrogance. He wasn't defeated. He was just getting started. The game had just changed. And Frank, with his empty buzzwords and his ill-gotten gains, had no idea he was about to step into a meticulously laid trap. The real work, Chris knew, was about to begin. This wasn't an ending. It was the prelude to a very, very expensive reckoning. The sterile, recycled air of Chris's temporary workspace did little to cool the simmering intensity within him. He wasn't in an office anymore. He was in a war room, a digital fortress where evidence was his ammunition and meticulous planning was his strategy. His laptop, a relic of his former life, hummed with the quiet industry of purpose. Every email Frank had ever sent, every commit log from Project Zenith, every performance review that lauded his dedication, they were all meticulously organized, categorized, and cross-referenced. He'd even dug out old Slack messages, not just from Frank, but from colleagues who'd witnessed his relentless effort, their casual observations now serving as corroborating statements. Contracts, too, were reviewed, not for loopholes that would benefit him financially, but for the insidious clauses that outlined company responsibilities, ethical conduct, and the very definition of intellectual property. He knew Frank wouldn't simply admit defeat. He'd double down, rationalize, or worse, try to sweep Chris's contribution under the rug, penning him as a disgruntled employee who'd sabotaged his own career. But Chris had anticipated this. He built his case not just on his own brilliance, but on Frank's ineptitude and the systemic indifference of HR. He had created a narrative, a damning testament to his ownership, his diligence, and Frank's blatant disregard for both. This wasn't about seeking a mere severance package. It was about proving his worth and exposing the rot at the company's core. The first inkling that his absence was more than just a personnel change came not from a direct communication, but through the digital grapevine. An old colleague, Sarah, a fellow developer who still harbored a shred of decency, sent him a cryptic text. Project Zenith is glitching hard. Frank's losing his mind. Chris barely suppressed a smile. Glitching. His little digital booby trap was beginning to spring. It wasn't designed for immediate devastation, but for a slow, insidious erosion of confidence. Over the next few days, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. Emails from Sarah painted a picture of escalating chaos. They had a major client demo this morning. The checkout process failed for 3 consecutive users. The client was unamused. Frank's been back-to-back meetings, yelling about technical difficulties and unforeseen compatibility issues. They're scrambling to find someone to debug. Sound familiar? Familiar indeed. Chris had architected every single line of code, every integration, every user flow. He knew with absolute certainty that any significant disruption wasn't a bug, it was a symptom. Another message from Sarah arrived late one evening. HR sent a company-wide memo about unforeseen technical challenges impacting Project Zenith. They're offering a substantial bonus to anyone who can stabilize the platform. Frank's practically pulling his hair out. He's apparently been asking around for your contact information. Like you'd answer. Chris hadn't even needed to interact with Frank directly. The challenges were self-inflicted by Frank's arrogance. Every attempt to move, modify, or integrate Zenith without Chris's specific digital handshake was met with subtle yet infuriating resistance. The payment gateway would time out. User profiles would inexplicably corrupt. The search functionality would return nonsensical results. Individually, these might seem like minor bugs. Collectively, they were a slow bleed, a digital death of 1,000 paper cuts. The tipping point, according to Sarah's increasingly alarmed messages, came during a critical investor presentation. The entire website, the crown jewel of Project Zenith, froze during a live demonstration. Frank, red-faced and visibly sweating, stammered through apologies, blaming a phantom server overload. But Sarah's insider account revealed a different story. The system had initiated a graceful shutdown sequence, a protocol only Chris knew how to bypass, triggered by unauthorized access to critical configuration files. Files Frank had undoubtedly tried to tamper with. The investors, not known for their patience, had reportedly expressed extreme displeasure, demanding immediate answers and substantial is less than BOS, is greater than assurances. The company's stock, which had been soaring on the anticipation of Zenith's launch, began to falter. Chris, meanwhile, remained silent, meticulously building his final move. He knew Frank would eventually resort to desperate measures. He tried to rehire Chris, perhaps offer a pittance for his silence and expertise. Or, more likely, he'd escalate to legal, accusing Chris of sabotage. Chris had prepared for both. His digital trap wasn't just about causing problems. It was about creating a verifiable record of who was truly in control and who was out of their depth. He drafted a single, carefully worded email. It wasn't addressed to Frank or even to the company's internal legal department. It was addressed to an external entity, a regulatory body specializing in corporate malfeasance and intellectual property disputes. He attached a curated selection of his meticulously organized documentation, the commit logs showcasing his sole authorship of Zenith's core architecture, emails detailing his consistent performance and Frank's dismissive attitude, and most importantly, a technical report that outlined the precise nature of the glitches, explaining them not as bugs, but as deliberate countermeasures triggered by unauthorized access and modification of proprietary code. He explained, in clinical detail, how the system was designed to safeguard against its own exploitation, a digital guardian ensuring the integrity of his work. He didn't send the email immediately. He waited. He watched the panic in the company escalate through Sarah's increasingly frantic messages. Frank was reportedly on the verge of a nervous breakdown, HR was in damage control mode, and the board was demanding heads. Then, with the calm deliberation of a chess master, Chris hit send. The notification pinged on his laptop. The email was sent. He leaned back, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over him. He hadn't initiated a war. He had simply activated a defense mechanism. He had set a trap. And now, the architects of his dismissal were walking right into it, blind to the fact that they were not the hunters, but the prey. The company was in disarray, their flagship project faltering, their leadership exposed. They knew something was terribly wrong, and they suspected Chris was the cause. But they still had no idea just how deep the rabbit hole went, or how much leverage he truly held. The silence from his end was not an absence of action, but the quiet before the storm he had so carefully orchestrated. The frantic energy that had permeated Chris's temporary workspace for the past week now coalesced into a single, desperate point. The phone on his desk rang, not with the casual annoyance of a wrong number, but with the insistent urgency of a drowning man grasping for a lifeline. He recognized the caller ID instantly, Frank. He let it ring for a full minute, allowing the manufactured tension to build, savoring the silence before the inevitable plea. He knew Frank wouldn't be calling to gloat or to reiterate his fabricated reasons for Chris's dismissal. This was a call born of pure, unadulterated panic. Finally, with a sigh that was more performance than fatigue, Chris answered. Chris, thank God. We need you, urgently. Frank's voice, usually laced with manufactured bravado, was a thin, reedy sound bordering on a whine. Project Zenith is a disaster. We're talking catastrophic failure. The board they're livid. They're talking about dissolving the entire division. You're the only one who understands this system. You have to come back. We'll make it right. Anything you want. Chris listened, his expression unreadable. He'd anticipated this, but the raw desperation in Frank's voice was still something to behold. The meticulously organized documents on his laptop felt like an arsenal, each one a loaded bullet waiting to be fired. Make it right? Chris's voice was calm, measured, a stark contrast to Frank's frantic tone. Frank, what exactly does making it right entail in your estimation? Frank stammered, clearly unaccustomed to being questioned, let alone on the defensive. Anything. Reinstatement, a significant bonus, your old project back, a promotion. Hell, we'll even offer you a leadership position in the new structure. Just fix this, please. Chris allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. This was precisely the scenario he'd engineered. Frank, I appreciate the offer, but I believe you're misunderstanding the situation. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The disaster you're experiencing with Project Zenith isn't a series of unfortunate bugs. It's a deliberate response, a consequence of unauthorized access and modification of proprietary code. Code that I solely developed and meticulously documented. A strangled gasp came from the other end of the line. What are you talking about? Sabotage? Not sabotage, Frank, Chris corrected softly. Protection. A safeguard. You see, when I was unceremoniously dismissed, I anticipated that my work might be repurposed without proper acknowledgement. So I built in a failsafe, a digital guardian. The system is designed to respond to unauthorized changes with what you're now calling catastrophic failure. It's not broken. It's simply refusing to cooperate with those who have no right to its control. He could hear Frank's labored breathing, the frantic shuffling of papers in the background. But you can't just... That's illegal. We can sue you for damages. Can you? Chris' voice remained level. I have comprehensive documentation, Frank. Every line of code, every commit log, every email exchange. I also have a formal report detailing the specific triggers that initiated the system's response. A report I've already submitted to the relevant regulatory bodies, along with a formal inquiry regarding intellectual property rights and unfair dismissal. The silence on Frank's end was deafening. He knew, Chris could feel it, that he was outmaneuvered. The threat wasn't just about his job or his reputation anymore. It was about the company's very survival. What do you want, Chris? Frank finally choked out, the words heavy with resignation. What's your price? Chris took a deep breath. This was the endgame. He had two paths, two distinct ways to ensure his justice and cripple his former tormentors. I have two options for you, Frank, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Option A. You and HR immediately tender your resignations, effective immediately. The board will be presented with my documentation, and I will offer my services to stabilize Project Zenith and ensure its successful launch. In return, I will receive full credit for my work, a substantial bonus commensurate with the project's value, and a formal acknowledgement of wrongful termination. Option B. Chris paused, letting the weight of the alternative sink in, is that you refuse. In which case, my report, along with all accompanying evidence, will be forwarded to the Securities and Exchange Commission and will be made public. This will undoubtedly trigger a full investigation, potentially leading to massive fines, investor lawsuits, and irreparable damage to the company's reputation. Project Zenith will likely be shelved, and Frank, your career will be significantly curtailed. He waited, the silence stretched thick with the unspoken acknowledgement of Frank's predicament. He could practically see the sweat beading on Frank's forehead, the dawning horror of his impending downfall. Option A, Frank whispered, his voice barely audible. We'll do option A. Chris felt a quiet sense of completion. It wasn't about revenge in the vindictive sense, but about restoring balance. The board, faced with overwhelming evidence and the threat of crippling legal repercussions, made swift decisions. Frank and his compliant HR manager were escorted from the building with a swiftness that bordered on comical. The board, eager to salvage their investment, met with Chris. They listened intently as he presented his findings, his evidence irrefutable. They saw not a disgruntled ex-employee, but a brilliant architect whose work had been stolen. The outcome was decisive. Chris was reinstated as the lead developer for Project Zenith. His project, his name emblazoned on the launch materials. He received a bonus that far exceeded his wildest expectations, a testament to the value he brought, and a formal apology from the board. The company, chastened and humbled, began the arduous process of rebuilding trust, both internally and with its stakeholders. As Chris walked back into the familiar confines of the development floor, the air felt different. It wasn't just the quiet hum of servers anymore, it was the palpable sense of respect. His colleagues, who had once offered sympathetic glances, now greeted him with genuine admiration. He had not just reclaimed his project, he had reclaimed his dignity. The journey had been arduous, a task of patience and resolve. But in the end, he had proven that integrity and hard work, when coupled with meticulous preparation, could overcome even the most entrenched corporate arrogance. The digital trap had sprung, not with a bang, but with the resounding clarity of truth. And as he settled back into his workspace, the familiar glow of his monitors illuminating his face, Chris knew one thing for sure. The corporate world might try to bury brilliance, but it could never truly extinguish it. Sometimes, the most satisfying justice is the kind you build yourself, line by meticulous line. If watching corporate hubris meet its match, and a wronged individual reclaim their destiny resonates with you, consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories of calculated justice. Because in the end, the best revenge is living well and proving them all wrong. The foundation is always built by the hands that lay the first stone, and those hands deserve to be recognized.